For nearly 3 decades, Sydney Brooke Simpson lived behind silence. The daughter of O.J. Simpson and Nicole Brown Simpson grew up watching the world turn her family's tragedy into headlines, punchlines, and non-stop courtroom drama. While the public obsessed over what became known as the trial of the century, Sydney was left carrying something no verdict could ever erase. Please subscribe. It means a lot to me and costs you nothing. Memory. It wasn't fame or money that shaped her childhood. It was one night in 1994 that never truly ended. A moment that split her life cleanly in two, before and after. On June 12, 1994, Los Angeles police were called to a residence on South Bundy Drive in Brentwood, where Nicole Brown Simpson and her friend Ronald Goldman were found outside the home. Inside, upstairs, 2 young children were discovered asleep, unaware of the chaos unfolding below. One of those children was 8-year-old Sydney. For the world, the scene became a historic investigation. For her, it became the night, the moment everything changed forever. As the case exploded into a global spectacle, cameras crowded the streets and reporters chased every detail. Her father, once celebrated as a national sports hero, became the center of accusations that dominated television screens across America. When the now infamous white Ford Bronco sped down the freeway days later, Sydney was kept hidden with relatives. She was too young to understand what the chase meant, but old enough to sense the fear etched across every adult face around her. What the world rarely paused to consider was how that moment felt through the eyes of children caught inside it. Years later, in a private statement referenced by a legal agency in 2024, Sydney described fragmented memories from that night: confusion, loud movement, and sudden silence. She did not claim understanding at the time, only that something felt deeply wrong. At 8 years old, she couldn't process it, but decades later, she wrote that the feeling never left. When investigators spoke with family members in 1994, Sydney was carefully shielded by relatives and legal representatives. No one wanted to place more weight on a child already carrying too much. Official records simply noted that both children were unharmed, a statement that said nothing about the emotional scars left behind. School records later showed Sydney struggling with anxiety, panic episodes, and fear triggered by sudden sounds. Teachers noted her discomfort sitting near doors and her visible distress during routine classroom noise. Eventually, she was transferred to a smaller private school in hopes of creating a calmer environment. After her mother's funeral, custody was granted to Nicole's family, led by her grandmother, Juditha Brown. The Browns, already devastated by loss, took in Sydney and her younger brother, Justin Ryan Simpson, trying to rebuild something that resembled normal life. But normal no longer existed. Every magazine cover, every television replay of the trial reopened the wound. Even as a child, Sydney became part of history, without ever choosing to be. When the trial began in January 1995, the world waited for answers. For Sydney, it marked the start of years spent processing emotions she couldn't yet name. Therapists later described her drawings and behavior as signs of deep emotional trauma, not explanations, just expressions of pain. The Brown family refused interviews, cameras, and public appearances. They understood that any exposure would turn the children into symbols instead of kids trying to heal. On October 3, 1995, when O.J. Simpson was acquitted, over 100 million people watched live. Some celebrated, others grieved. But for Sydney, there was only confusion. The man she once called Dad was free, while her mother was still gone. That contradiction followed her quietly for years. By the end of 1996, reports described her as polite, withdrawn, and deeply cautious around strangers. The media eventually moved on, but inside her world, the noise never stopped. The late 1990s blurred into therapy sessions, custody arrangements, and a determined effort to remain invisible. After the acquittal, Sydney and Justin remained under the care of their grandmother and aunt, protected fiercely from cameras and questions. Every step was taken to shield them from the public eye, but no one could fully protect them from memories already carried inside. Sydney rarely spoke publicly, even within her own family, not because she had nothing to say, but because silence became her safest place. According to a social worker's note from 1996, Sydney Brooke Simpson often refused to answer questions about her parents. When asked to describe her mother, she quietly said, "She smiled a lot." When asked about her father, she said nothing at all behind closed doors. The trauma didn't explode outward. It collapsed inward. Even professionals described her silence as a protective shield, not avoidance. By 2000, the Brown family made a hard but necessary choice. Sydney and her younger brother Justin Ryan Simpson would leave Los Angeles behind and relocate to Florida. The goal wasn't opportunity or comfort, it was anonymity. In Florida, there were no reporters waiting, no courtroom reruns on every screen, no strangers asking questions that never healed. For the first time, Sydney could try to be invisible. In Florida, she attended Gulliver Preparatory High School between 2000 and 2003. Teachers described her as intelligent and focused, but emotionally distant. She avoided personal conversations and shut down any attention tied to her last name. School records later showed her family formally requested that her identity be kept private during public events. Even her yearbook photo was quietly removed at graduation. Still, the weight of her name followed her everywhere. She couldn't erase it, but she could outgrow it. Determined to shape her own path, Sydney enrolled at Boston University in 2004. She majored in sociology with a focus on criminology and deviant behavior, a choice that reflected questions she'd carried since childhood. Her academic work centered on the psychological impact of family violence on children, using real cases while never referencing her own. Professors later noted her precision, empathy, and emotional restraint. Without saying it out loud, she was studying her own life from a distance. College offered her something rare, a sense of control. She formed a small circle of friends, but her boundaries were firm. No discussions about family, no questions about the past, no media exposure. She avoided public speaking, skipped campus organizations, and kept her world tightly contained. Privacy wasn't a preference, it was survival. After graduating in 2008, Sydney moved to Atlanta and began working for a nonprofit supporting children affected by domestic violence. For over a year, she served quietly as a case coordinator, helping families whose pain mirrored her own, without ever revealing why she understood them so deeply. A supervisor later described her as reserved, deeply empathetic, and fiercely committed. During this period, Sydney began writing private notes about her memories, reflections she never intended to share. Some of those writings later surfaced in legal filings, revealing her struggle to reconcile the image of her father with the fear she remembered from childhood. One line read, "I was taught to love him, but I remember being afraid of his voice." Those words stayed locked away for years. By 2010, Sydney had fully committed to a life of invisibility. She rejected interview requests, declined documentary offers, and changed addresses more than once. In an era of constant online sharing, she chose absence instead. No social media, no public footprint, only walls she built carefully. By the 2000s, she had finally created the quiet life she once dreamed of. Living in St. Petersburg, Florida, far from Los Angeles and the headlines, she focused on rebuilding, literally. While her father, O.J. Simpson, served time in Nevada for an unrelated conviction, Sydney launched a small real estate business under her full legal name. Buying, renovating, and managing properties became her way of reclaiming identity on her own terms. In 2012, she began a relationship with Stuart Alexander Lee. He later described her as kind but guarded, shaped by recurring nightmares and long-held memories. She had one rule: her father's name was never spoken. When O.J. Simpson was released on parole in 2017, Sydney remained silent. She didn't attend hearings, didn't comment publicly, and didn't explain her choice. Silence was still her shield. In 2019, she agreed to meet him one final time. The meeting was brief and heavy, with things left unsaid. He handed her a copy of If I Did It and reportedly said, "You should read this. You'll understand me better." In a later written statement, Sydney reflected, "He didn't have to say it. The way he looked at me said everything." She knew that moment marked their final meeting. She walked away completely, ending all remaining contact and later formally declining any inheritance connected to her father's estate. It wasn't done in anger or public defiance. It was quiet, deliberate, and final. For Sydney Brooke Simpson, this was her last step of separation and a personal acknowledgement of what she had carried silently for years. On April 10, 2024, O.J. Simpson, once known worldwide as The Juice, passed away in Las Vegas at the age of 76. His family confirmed the death in a brief social media statement, citing complications related to metastatic prostate cancer and requesting privacy. The announcement was restrained and distant, but for Sydney, closure had already arrived long before the world read the headline. By the time O.J.'s health declined, Sydney had not spoken to him in years. The only exception came during a short private hospital visit in late 2023, just months before his death. According to records later referenced by a hospital staff member, the encounter was not emotional or reconciliatory. O.J. was described as weak and barely responsive, while Sydney stood at the foot of the bed, composed and firm. The aide later recalled Sydney saying quietly, "I didn't come to forgive him. I came to say, I remember." According to that same account, O.J. appeared emotional, but did not respond verbally. Sydney's final words before leaving were described as calm but decisive, not spoken for drama, but for herself. After his passing, her actions spoke louder than any statement. She did not attend the funeral. Her name did not appear publicly as next of kin. She was not listed as a beneficiary and did not contest the outcome. Court records later filed in Clark County showed that Sydney had submitted a formal legal disclaimer months earlier, declining any claim to the estate, whether direct or indirect. This type of decision is rare and legally binding. It was not about money or dispute. It was about boundaries. In May 2024, a statement released through her legal representatives included 6 brief paragraphs. The final line stood out sharply: "I retain the right to choose which memories I carry forward in my life." She added that she chose to honor her mother's memory above all else. That sentence landed with more weight than decades of public debate. For years, the world argued endlessly over verdicts, evidence, and theories. But for the child who lived inside that household, whose life was reshaped overnight, the experience was personal, not theoretical. Sydney did not share her perspective through interviews, documentaries, or press conferences. She spoke through legal language instead, through signed refusals, formal withdrawals, and public absence. Every document, every choice, and every silence formed a clear message. She had chosen a life outside her father's shadow. In the months following O.J.'s death, multiple media outlets attempted to reach Sydney for comment. None were successful. Her representatives issued a single consistent response: Ms. Simpson will not be participating in public discussions regarding Mr. Simpson's passing. There were no elaborations and no exceptions. Later that year, internal estate filings confirmed that Sydney had declined all assets associated with her father, including joint business interests and trust holdings established years earlier. Her decision was absolute and irreversible. In a private legal addendum referenced by court filings, she expressed that accepting those assets would conflict with her personal values. Her refusal was not framed as punishment or accusation. It was framed as release. For nearly 30 years, Sydney had lived as the silent child of one of the most public family tragedies in modern history. With one legal decision, she transformed silence into clarity, not by speaking louder, but by stepping away entirely. And with that choice, she reclaimed something the spotlight had taken long ago: control over her own story. For the first time since 1994, Sydney Brooks Simpson was free. Not from the past itself, but from the weight it carried. She wasn't running, and she didn't disappear. She simply kept building the quiet life she had already chosen, far from noise and judgment. After her father's death, Sydney didn't step into the spotlight. She stayed exactly where she was. By 2020, she had become the majority owner and CEO of JMI Investment Properties, a real estate company based in Florida. No interviews, no press tours, just steady work, renovated homes, and a future she controlled on her own terms. She rebuilt, not loudly, not publicly, but fully. And in the end, that choice said more than any headline ever could. If this story made you think, leave a comment below. Like the video if you found it powerful. Share it so others can hear the parts that were never shouted. And subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next. We'll see you in the next one.